Joining me on the line right now, I had the pleasure of meeting him at one of the events somewhere around the country. I don't even remember when at this point. Scott Rasmussen, of course, is the man behind Rasmussen Polling, and he joins us this afternoon. Good afternoon to you. Thanks so much.
Dana, it's great to be with you.
The latest, obviously, all eyes are on you and your latest data released today. Here in Missouri, we have been anxiously awaiting to see what the impact of this controversy has been in the Missouri Senate race. There was a poll released yesterday discussing right now the gap between McCaskill and Aiken, and here we have the presidential polling where you have Mitt Romney a point behind. The latest, first I want to ask you, because grassroots in Missouri is unbelievably divided. The Republican Party in this state is unbelievably divided. Some people are putting a lot of stock in what is coming out of Rasmussen polls. Some are saying that it is just strategy from the Republican establishment. Scott, when you hear that, what is your response?
You know, it's the same every election cycle. When people hear bad news, they want to blame the pollster. My favorite example from the last cycle was Arlen Specter was upset when we showed a poll, when we showed that he was trailing by 19 in the Republican primary. He came out, said all kinds of bad things about our polling, and then 2 weeks later became a Democrat. I mean, eventually the reality of this situation does sink in. What's happening is very simple with Congressman Aiken. Republicans are divided, as you suggested. Some are thinking, you know, we really like what he said. He's our nominee. We got to stand by him. Others are saying we really need to win this Senate race, and they're hoping for a third-party option. 13% of Republican voters now say they would prefer a candidate other than Aiken or McCaskill to vote for, and that obviously hurts at the polls. And we're seeing the same thing, the same divide in the presidential race. Romney is down by a point. That's a little bit of a shock, and I don't expect it will last all that long. But I think the reason is because he came out and said that Aiken should get out. And to some of Aiken's supporters, that was not the message they wanted to hear from the party's presidential nominee.
Wow, that goes completely against some of well, and that makes sense too, because that was they came on very strong with all of this. Is this something? Do you think that the congressman could have weathered this storm? I know voters can sometimes be fickle, and news cycles happen very quickly. I'm going to ask you to get out your crystal ball. Do you think that this low polling is going to continue? Is this an insurmountable odd right now? Odds that we're up against with McCaskill, or do you think that this may pick up?
When you say insurmountable, I've been watching this long enough that you never say never. You never say something is impossible. What I do believe is the race went from one where the Republicans were strongly favored to one where McCaskill is strongly favored. I looked back in our data to try and find a parallel, and the closest I could come was Tom Coburn back in 2004. He won a divided primary. He was not terribly popular with a lot of Republicans in the state. And on Labor Day, he was only getting 62% of Bush voters to support him. He came back and won, and basically the Bush voters eventually came back home, not because they liked Coburn, but because they wanted to help the president. The difference, the reason that'll be a little tougher for Aiken, is that there was no threat to take money away when Coburn was running. There was no incendiary remark that eventually triggered everything. And there were not a lot of people calling for Coburn to get out of that race. He won the primary, and that was it.
Yeah. So you really feel that, like, looking at this latest presidential poll, that this isn't so much that Aiken hurt Romney in this poll, that maybe the Romney ticket kind of dinged themselves because they asked Aiken to step out of the race.
Yeah, I think that probably is a temporary impact. And from everything, you know, I'm not in the state, so I look at this from the numbers and I look at it from what I read about the coverage. 93% of voters in the state say they're following the story. It seems intense coverage, and we know that when something like this happens, people are passionately involved. And when they hear something, you know, there are some Republicans who are probably mad at Mike Huckabee because they think it's so obvious that Aiken should get out. They're mad at Huckabee for saying he shouldn't. That is a part of the process. And it's very dangerous for a party to have these kind of divides heading into the national convention, heading into Labor Day.
Yeah. So has anyone, I mean, you gave the example of Tom Coburn. Who else has really bounced back from numbers like this? I mean, do you think that the congressman is in a position right now where, because the clock is beginning to run out? Is it possible for him to bounce back? Do you think that maybe the conventions will suck all of the energy out of the story, and that there's a possibility he could get around this?
Again, there's a possibility, but I think it's a long shot.
Wow.
He is clearly the underdog right now. He has set himself up. He's energized Democrats. Again, I wouldn't rule it out.
Right.
But I don't think there's a very likely path to victory for Congressman Aiken. And the other side of it is, if a well-known candidate gets in the race right now as the Republican, that person would probably be the favorite. However, if a lesser-known candidate is sent in to replace Congressman Aiken, that would have to happen sooner rather than later for that person to have a good chance.
One of the things that we noticed, and I made the remark about just before this segment, was this is men in this latest with your latest poll today. These are men who have left Romney because of this. How big are they playing into this drop?
In terms of Romney, they're not playing a very big role in the drop at all. It's more Republicans who are disappointed. Again, that's why I think it's people who are unhappy with his comments. When we talk about the Aiken drop, it is all among Republicans and unaffiliated voters. This is the only poll I can ever remember doing where we found a 0 in one of the columns about third-party support. No Democrats any longer are saying they want a third option. They're going to vote for Claire McCaskill. But 13% of Republicans, 14% of unaffiliated say they're going to vote for somebody other than those two candidates, and that's
right.
Tough numbers.
One of the other the story, I think, in all of this, everyone's focusing so much on Aiken's performance in this polling data, but the other story, I think, in this, which could be equally as big, if not bigger, is that Claire McCaskill's unfavorability has been increasingly high in every single one of these polls, despite everything with the Aiken controversy. This is something, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, that seems to be a story right there.
Yeah, Claire McCaskill, it's no surprise. She knows it, and everybody in Missouri knows it. She has been a very vulnerable incumbent. She's had some questions raised about her taxes and other personal issues, but most damaging of all has been the fact that she's closely identified with President Obama. That's not a good thing to be in Missouri and a lot of states these days. Every poll that we did from the beginning of this race showed her trailing all the Republican hopefuls. She was polling in the low to mid-40s on her best days. So this is a candidate who is very likely to lose. She is not necessarily in a strong position right now. It's just that somebody else is a little bit weaker.
Right. Well, I so appreciate you. You turn these around, and we appreciate the data, because in Missouri, I mean, you can tell it's been a tornado of insanity here, Scott.
Well, I'm glad you were in the middle of it. I was out here safe at the Jersey Shore, but there are times Wisconsin polling in the last couple of years has been startling because of the intensity. And that was startling because it just lasted for so long. But this poll, the way this story has ripped through the state, is I won't say unprecedented, but it's very, very rare. And it is a story that is going to have implications depending on what the next steps are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Scott Rasmussen with Rasmussen Reports. RasmussenReports.com is the website. Thank you so much for all that you do.